Hey guys, I'm Nathan from Arms and Armor. Today, we're going to talk about swords and lies and lying liars to pile on to some of the recent controversy in the sword world. Stay tuned. So this sword that I'm holding here, you can see right there, it says Andrea Ferrara on it. Now, Andrea Ferrara was an Italian bladesmith who is credited with teaching a bunch of British smiths how to make fine laminated steel blades. He died in 1610. This sword is clearly 18th century. It's a very fine sword. Beautiful original broadsword. Grab my other glove. It's an original from the Oakeshott Institute Collection. It is super thin. It's a beautiful blade, very high quality. But why does it lie, right? It says Andrea Ferrara on it. Andrea Ferrara had been dead for at least 100 years when this sword was made. So he clearly didn't make it. Was it fraud? Well, we'll see. I started thinking about this issue after watching Matt Easton's video about the difficulties with replicas of replicas that have been going on, right? With theft of intellectual property in the sword world. And it really made me think about the kinds of truth claims about swords that are made by all kinds of makers, right? So the conflict that's been going on, right? Matt designed a saber, Coveton was making it, and then this other company appears to have pretty much just absolutely copied that product and lied about it. Right? This isn't actually very rare in the sword world. It happens a lot. Kind of the rare thing is that Matt actually called him out directly by name, and good on you, Matt. It's the kind of stuff that we shouldn't promote. And so I think that there are at least 4 kinds of lies that are told by modern sword makers and by historical sword makers that we can think about, right? And the first that's relevant to modern sword makers is claims about authenticity, right? Claims that a certain sword is actually a replica, right? So, for example, there's a maker who is pretty notorious who makes a Black Prince sword, right? It's called the Black Prince sword. That's fine, right? We make a Black Prince sword. We first handled it and measured it when it was in Oakeshott's collection, right? So we've really looked at it and studied it. Ours differs a bit from the original. Every replica differs a little bit from it, but it's reasonably close. This other maker, right, claims that they went to the Royal Armories in Leeds and took measurements of the original Black Prince sword in 2016. Well, the Black Prince sword has never, ever been in the Royal Armories. And in fact, the picture they have on their website isn't of the Black Prince sword. One is from Oakeshott's book, and the other is a different Type 15 sword, right? So when they're calling it an exacting reproduction of the Black Prince sword, it's clearly bullshit because the basic facts are untrue, right? It doesn't make it a bad sword. It makes it a lie. And I find that kind of nasty, like taking advantage of, you know, the credulous nature of people who collect swords, right? Uncool. Another type of lying that modern makers often do is making misleading claims about their steel, right? So there's another well-known maker of very expensive fantasy swords that has a patent-pending process of thermoprocessing, blah, 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 that makes this super steel that no one else can do because it's tied to all these historical things. It's totally bullshit, right? There's only certain things you can actually do with metal. They didn't invent some amazing process. It's just marketing, but it's marketing based on kind of lies that are really misleading. That's kind of gross, right? A responsible sword maker isn't gonna mislead you about what their product's made out of and how novel that is, right? It is lying. It's gross, right? Another kind of lie, geographic lies. As a former geography professor, this is my favorite, which is misleading people about where your product is from. Now, this has a long history, right? We go back into, the 15th century, in the 14th century even, mostly 15th century though, and you'll see a lot of swords with, say, the Passau wolf mark that probably weren't made in Passau, right? Or, they have a Solingen mark and they probably weren't from Solingen, or a Toledo mark that misleads you about where they were from. But that was a different thing back then, right? So much like the sword I was showing you at the beginning, right, the Andrea Ferrara sword, in the pre-modern world, those kinds of claims, like signing an Andrea Ferrara or a Viking sword, right, with Ulfbert on it, or a Passau wolf, or if a Toledo blade says Alonso de Sahagún me fecit, made me on it, right? All of those things are more like an invocation than they are a copyright, right? Or a signature on a Renaissance painting. That wasn't something that was done in the same way in the past as it is today. It's a totally different context, right? So were there real Ulfberts and fake Ulfberts? Probably, yeah. There are probably better examples and worse examples of them. Was Ulfbert a dude who was making these swords? I don't think so, right? Maybe there was some Ulfbert, but it became a sign of quality, right? And a prayer for quality, right? You're saying, this sword, I wrote the magic word on it that means it's a good sword. The Ferrara, right? Andrea Ferrara, the name, just came to mean this is a really good sword, right? It meant like real McCoy in the 18th century and even into the 19th century in Scotland. Right? So is it a lie? Not really. Anyone would know that he was dead, right? If the claim was that Andrea Ferrara actually made that blade, probably not. But they understood that it meant good sword, right? So today, how do people lie geographically? Well, they might claim that their swords are made in Canada or something like that, for example, when they're clearly from India or China, right? And the fact that they were made in India or China doesn't make them bad, right? The lying about it is the thing that makes someone a bad actor, right? So finally, the last kind of lie that we see in the sword world is this intellectual property lying, right? Of simply stealing the work of more knowledgeable makers. And this happens constantly, especially for lower priced swords, right? Where people don't have the experience to design products that are good from the ground up, and they're just trying to cash in on someone else's knowledge. Right? So this could be something like, naming your sword the exact same name of another maker's sword and making it a copy of the same sword, right? Which is scummy. It's just a sleazeball thing. And this happens a lot. And I think people who know what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. That's stealing, right? You could make a replica of the same sword and call it something else. That's cool, right? Although there are a lot of swords out there, so you don't have to copy the exact same one that someone's put a lot of time into replicating. Intellectual property stuff, also being a writer. I've written most of our blog posts and all of that along with Craig Johnson, and it's disconcerting and annoying to look at other makers' websites occasionally and see where they've just cut and pasted our intellectual work into their product page, right? This happens all the time, where they copy our blogs. But you guys know where to find our blogs, and we try not to steal from other people when we do that. So it's unfortunate that people lie in the sword world. I think it's, in my opinion, a really good reason to form a relationship with an artisan who is somewhat local to you and you know is respected by other people in the community, right? This is the thing. So when I go to events, like, what am I hanging out with? Well, scholars and sword fighters, but the other makers, right? So like, me and Mike Sigmund from Albion, we're tight, right? Guys from Sterling Armory, we're tight, right? The guys from Valiant Armory, we're tight. Sam from Castile, we're tight. You know why? Because none of them lie, right? None of them lie about their products. They're all good makers who are making good stuff, and they're not sleazeballs. But there is a carny undercurrent in the sword world where there are known bad actors who are out there who really take advantage of the unsuspecting enthusiasm of sword collectors. And, you know, it's not pretty. I guess it happens in a lot of industries. In the sword world, maybe it happens a little more because we all love the fantasy of swords a little bit, right? So we want to be wowed by things, and sometimes it makes us susceptible to certain kinds of lies. But I applaud Matt for calling it out, you know. And I got nothing against the swordier guy. Maybe it's a mistake. I don't know. I don't really care. There's different conventions in different countries for doing stuff. However, I think it's a good conversation for the sword collector world to have and to think about where you get your stuff. All right. Thanks very much. Take care.